everybody fills it out and reports.
And I appreciate that, Chris. I would point out that in review of the Form 700s, there were a total of 3 in 2012 on the Form 700s, transportation disclosures. So assuming that folks are disclosing those instances that Chris are talking about, there's only 3 instances, and the median cost was $47. So again, not disagreeing that there's a different business model, but what we tried to provide you with was actual figures. And the actual figures don't really identify, again, either way, they don't identify either a problem with applying the policy, and they don't identify certainly an ongoing problem that needs to be addressed by the policy. I think it supports both. And that's why your decision is a difficult one.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the questions that we're dealing with here go back to, I think, the fundamental question of what is the purpose of the adoption of the policy. I guess the initial one is to not just set a standard, but to present a public face of having the highest ethical standards. And the question is, do we have a policy? Is this a policy that does that without substantively limiting our ability to do the jobs that we're doing? What we're hearing from Chris is that he believes that it will. And I guess what I'm hearing is kind of ambivalence on the part of members of the committee as well. At least ambivalence, if not an outright determination that they believe that it will. Is there a, so the recommendation at this point, is there a consensus of the committee as to how we want to proceed? And I see 3 different choices. One is obviously to recommend adoption of the policy as presented. The second one I see is to suggest modification of the policy to try to address the issues that have been raised by Mr. Elman and others, and members of the committee. And the third is to reject the policy and, after full consideration of it, decide that the existing, instead of having our own policy, we would simply rely on the statutory policies with respect to the disclosure of gifts that is already in place. And I guess the question is, and I think the reason, before I ask people to weigh in on those 3, I would suggest that one of the reasons that we, and I'll ask Mr. Bartow to speak to this question before I ask people to respond. I think we went into this because of a perception that there was a gap, that there was a sense, whether real or imagined, that the statutory gift policy, the statutory obligation to make disclosure, was not sufficiently, that the net was not sufficiently fine, as you were, to address the desire to make it clear that, from a public perception standpoint, we are at the highest level. And that simply relying on the statutory obligation kind of leaves us as, it doesn't put us where we want to be. And I think that's still the case, and you can address that. I'd appreciate it if you would address that, because I think that's why we went down this road in the first place. This may not be where we may not be where we wanted to go, but I'm not sure that, from my perspective, I'm not sure that relying on the statutory requirements is where we want to be either. But if you could address that, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly. Let me start with the last point that you made. It has been expressed as the philosophy of this board, and certainly management. You know, the tone from the top has always been, we want to stake our flag on the highest ethical peak, and to do that, we're looking for ways to make that statement and to prevent any sort of violation. And so originally, as you've articulated, originally it was, okay, we have this set of rules out there, but we can do something better as an organization. We can do this. It seemed right in the spirit of the times to do this, and CalSTRS, again, leading the way in ethical standards. The fineness of the net was, when we looked at the FPPC rules, you know, those rules are only addressed to those folks who are Form 700 files, which is a very small portion of the organization. Jill, you would know what those numbers are. And the idea that a gift policy should only apply to certain members, or that there's not an opportunity or a perception at a different level of the organization that someone could at least be perceived to operate as a result of a gift or a gratuity from a member of the public or someone doing business with us. I think that was incorrect and not wide enough. So the flag was, we're more ethical, and everybody in the organization is ethical and cannot be influenced. And there's no perception. Again, I think always, though, the understanding was that we know that folks that work for us won't be influenced by a cup of coffee. When you're dealing, I believe Mr. Elman has $1 billion in investment authority. He's not, well, even if he had $1, he couldn't be influenced by a cup of coffee. So, and his entire staff. That's never been the issue. The issue is, do we want to stake that flag on a higher peak, and then and let everyone see that we're different. Our members are our teachers, and teachers or educators teach these things. They're the voice you hear in the back of your head when you think, you know, other than your parents and your religious leaders, those are the voices that you hear. It's telling you what's right and what's wrong. And so I think that was the philosophical underpinning of wanting to go this higher road. I do think that we've worked on this for quite a while. So I would address option number 2, which was make modifications to address the comments today. First of all, I will tell you, since you're the board, we do whatever you ask us to do. But I will tell you that now, having done this and come back here several times, I don't know if we can ever draft a policy that will address all the comments and all the concerns. We start getting into a long list of exceptions. And then just one other item to clarify, what we were talking about, creating a body of interpretive law, was not to create a list of exceptions, but to give other people guidance on how we were reading the policy, not to create a list of exceptions. So I want to make sure that I get that clear. The ethics and compliance officer would be interpreting the rule in coordination with the FPPC rules. There is a difference, though, because the FPPC rules has a much larger net as far as who can be a giftor, what the entity is. So your neighbor down the street who doesn't do business with CalSTRS, who never will do business with CalSTRS, if they give you a bottle of scotch that's worth $100, I assume there are bottles of scotch worth $100, that has to be reported on your FPPC form. It's not part of this gift policy. So it is a little bit different. It's solely related to the business that we do here. So those are sort of my answers to your questions. And I think a broader interpretation, at least from the legal office, is that it is something we can manage. It is something that is not because we have a problem, but it's because at least the voice that we hear is we always want to be out front. And those are my comments.
Mr. Elman, would a significant number of your concerns be addressed by raising the limit, or is it more than that?
Our concerns are the dollar limit.
Is there a dollar limit that you feel comfortable?
Well, and the compliance complexities are, I think they're going to be there in a lot of cases, but yeah, the ability for people to understand the compliance and make a judgment on the fly, the dollar limit makes almost everything. We'd have the Jill hotline that we'd be calling to get help. She's experienced with me already.
Is there a number that you would be comfortable with?
I have to apologize. I hadn't thought that through. You know, certainly the FPPC limit from our perspective is very high and not needed. It certainly could be cut in half or cut down a quarter of what it is. I haven't talked to staff to have a number in mind, but I think we typically see only 1 or 2 staff a year that even get over $100. But that's off the top of my head. You have the numbers. Sorry, I didn't bring my book up.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers with me, but I'd
We
have to
don't
look at the
aggregate it.
figures. Yeah, there weren't too many that were over 100, I would say.
Paul?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, from the way Brian posed it, the two reasons to think about a policy were one that we wanted to reduce the limit below the dollar limit below where the FPPC dollar limit is, and that we wanted a policy that would apply to more than just the people who have to file Form 700. So maybe we can do the second, but leave the dollar limits for the FPPC in place, and just say that, you know, the FPPC basically requires reporting of gifts over $50 and then prevents the receipt of gifts over 420, something like that, or 440. And if we said that the obligation to report gifts and to refuse to receive gifts consistent with the FPPC limits applied to a greater number of people within the organization, perhaps not defining the giftor the way it is in the FPPC, but the way we have laid it out in this proposed policy. That is, people who are, you know, going to potentially be doing business with CalSTRS, would be a way to address a deficiency that we've identified now, that is I think a legitimate one, but at the same time, for Form 700 filers, be consistent with what they have to do anyway right now, and have a limit that is perhaps more workable for Chris and his staff. So just a suggestion that maybe we separate those two objectives and address them in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to, I mean, Brian, you really need to assess the administrative value of that. Jill, how many people report on 700 now in the organization about? Is 100 and...
Yeah. Tiffany,
Yeah.
do you know?
180. So we were a 1,000-person organization, so roughly 820 aren't reporting on Form 700. So from a cosmetic perspective, that would be true, that we don't have universal Form 700. From a risk perspective, however, the people that are filing the Form 700s are where the risk is. That's why the law is what the law is.
I was just responding to what...
Yeah,
Brian said.
I want
Maybe
Brian
that-
just to
maybe
test that a little bit harder,
was-
because if you want to require 1,000 people filing with you, what is the value you got from that? Other than absolutely, you can actually say and make a public statement, 1,000 people filed and are doing that. Did you gain compliance value from 800 people now having a compliance system that would rarely have a risk? And also, again, the definition of gift is quite expansive under the 700, so you've got some educational challenges there too. So, I mean, it isn't, we don't want to just simply say 1,000 people should have filed without recognizing what you're taking on with that idea. And does it bring compliance value to you?
I think the suggestion is just to cast a wider net and encompass all staff and all board under, the proposal was under the existing FPPC guidelines for the 440 limit. I think that from a policy perspective, just a policy for CalSTRS, that it would set a standard, just that everybody in the organization is aware of, these gift issues, the gift policy, the implications that can be made that way. And I think there is some compliance value to it in that perspective, so.
Mr. McGuire?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I happen to agree with Mr. Rosensteel's comments, and I think, well, we only have, this committee is only composed of 5 members, only 3 of which are here, and therefore, I would like to recommend that something be brought back that's a little bit simpler, that it addresses, I think, the recommendations of Mr. Rosensteel be brought back to this committee at our next meeting to reconsider this issue.
Is that the consensus of members of the committee? I think you've heard the consensus of the committee on this point.
There's, and let me respond first. So, applying the FPPC rules in a gift policy, there may be some issues that we'll have to take a look at. I appreciate the simplicity of the.
I think I heard applying the FFPC limits,
Right.
but not the definition of.
Not the definition of the gift, but there
We
is.
use the narrow definitions that you've articulated here for the reasons that you've articulated.
And then widening the scope
Lifting,
of
Who has to report to
who has
Who has
to
to
report.
report.
And so there may be some legal issues that we're just going to have to look at, and I'm going to have to consult with our HR folks. I just wanted to let you know that, and there may be some.
Yeah, there could be union issues too. Yeah.
Yeah, those are labor issues that, again, I'll consult with HR on.
Yeah, I mean, my suggestion wasn't that this.
are you,
I'm not.
you're not on, go ahead.
My issue wasn't to expand the number of people to whom this new policy would apply beyond what is in the proposed new policy. It wasn't to go beyond
Yeah,
that. It was just that what you said was the reason that we needed a new policy is because we needed more people to be in compliance than just Form 700 filers. So I'm not saying that we go beyond what, and maybe I'm not clear then, what your proposed, or the policy before this committee would require in terms of who would have to be subject to these new policies beyond the people who file Form 700. I think Jack raises a very good question. We have to evaluate whether there are benefits to that wider net. But I was just saying, I wasn't suggesting a wider number of people beyond what was already in the policy proposed to this committee.
I understand that. There was a legal nuance I was trying to get, which is we're going to make reference to an outside body of law, or we may be perceived as we're making reference to an outside body of law that doesn't apply to certain people, as opposed to a wholly created policy. And so it's just a legal issue I want to explore. I didn't mean to narrow your comments. I have some concerns, and I don't want to address them on the fly. I do want to make sure that that just, normally I just say yes, sir, and move on, but I just want to let you know that I'll have to take a look at it. I think it's a good, healthy idea.
So Jack, did you get what you needed? Hey, Brian, are you comfortable with where we need to go?
I am. Thank you.
With that, I think we're on to our next item. Our insider trading policy, which should be even more fun.
So this next item involves an issue that was raised at the last committee meeting. And the issue involved the use of non-public confidential information by CalSTRS system for the benefit of the system. And I think there was a question whether or not that is permitted, and whether there were any legal obstacles to that, or whether we should have a policy on that issue. So we solicited the advice of outside counsel, and we reviewed the issue ourselves. And the opinion on that issue is in these materials, and I think there were three. There were basically, the answer was that it's not excluded under the law, except in these situations where there's an implied duty, by express law or a contractual agreement would prohibit it. So that was the conclusion that was reached. The committee had asked us to look at that issue, and that's what we did.
I apologize. Could you repeat that? Because I'm not sure I understood what you just said.
Sure. The issue that was raised at the last committee meeting was whether or not non-public information that the system has can be used for the benefit of the system. I think the example was we own some property, we're building a office complex, and then across the street there's a space that would be available to have a strip mall or something. We have knowledge that we are going to be building an office building and that it might be useful to have that, and so our inside information, I guess, is just that if we could purchase that property and build a strip mall, whether or not we can use that information, that knowledge that we have, to make that investment.
Without disclosing it first.
Exactly. And the consensus is that, yes, we are permitted to do that. Really, the only exclusions are under the SEC laws about publicly traded securities. So that's the differentiation.
Right, because our insider trading policy, unlike the federal insider trading policy, extends to non-public transactions.
Yes.
Isn't that what we're trying to decide?
Well,
Well,
that was,
Yeah.
I think our policy,
By non-public transactions, you mean such private equity transactions, yeah. That's what.
Go ahead.
That's actually one of the reasons why we explored it with a former SEC enforcement attorney to see where we would fall on those confidential material information that's not related to the sale and exchange of securities. And again, with the limited exceptions that are outlined there, the limited constrictions, it is okay for us to use that information to the benefit of the system as long as there's no duty to disclose. So the SEC body of law creates a very large duty to disclose, as I'm sure you're all aware. That duty does not apply to us, so we would not have to, that's not a constriction, even though it does apply in the non-public, it wouldn't apply it to us here. And that's why your policy, if it addresses that, only needs to, the only concern is when it would violate a duty that's imposed by law, which we don't see. And again, that's why we consulted a SEC attorney.
Mr. Rosenstein.
Now I'm confused by what you said, Brian.
I'm sorry.
So, I thought the
Which is
point-
why I handed it off to him. I'm confused.
I could see the look on his face.
I thought that the issue was that federal law about insider trading applies to publicly traded securities, but not anything else. Is that, and that's applicable to any type of investor, an individual, a pension fund, a corporation, a municipality, anybody. Everybody is prohibited from insider trading, but insider trading is defined only with respect to publicly traded securities. Is that correct?
Yeah, or trade in publicly traded securities, yes.
Right, okay. So, but that when you're talking about something that's not a publicly traded security, such as a real estate investment or a private equity investment that isn't traded as a security, that federal law does not prohibit trading on confidential information, or non-public, not confidential, does not prohibit making investment decisions based on non-public information.
I'm actually not, we're just talking about the SEC insider trading rules.
Right.
Yeah, you'd have to repeat the question. It doesn't
Well,
sound to me that
Well,
that's such a broad
what
statement.
we're saying here is that we're trying to make a decision about whether to extend our insider trading policy to include a prohibition on trading on non-public information with respect to transactions such as real estate transactions, which are not transactions in publicly traded securities.
That's correct.
That
We are.
okay?
This
Okay. So-
is attempting
And the
to broaden
basis
that.
on which we're saying we can make that, and the report to this committee says, under law, we don't have an obligation to prohibit trading, making investment decisions on non-public information with respect to transactions that are not traded securities, because the federal law doesn't
Right.
impose on us that restriction.
Right. Now I understand your
Okay,
question, yes.
so, and it's not because of our status as a public pension fund.
No, that was only a differentiation between the phraseology that was in the last draft that you looked at was, it said not for private gain. And the concern raised by the consultant and members of the committee was, well, that's private gain. What about the system? The system is public. So should that say not for public gain? And so that's what we looked at. And we said, basically, in a situation like that, can the system use inside information, not securities related, to the benefit of the system without having to disclose it? And that was the limited issue that we went back on. We came back with you basically saying, no, you can still have the restriction just apply to private. You don't need to expand it to public. So I apologize if I confused the concepts, but that's really the only issue that we brought back was, since there was at least a proposal that moved along that we would expand our policy to include this piece that you just talked about, how should we apply that? Should we apply that just to individuals, or should we apply that to the whole system? So if somebody in our system has that type of information, and it would benefit us as an investment, could we use it? And so what we came back with was saying, yes, we can, with the very limited strictures that we kind of like contractual and actual duty, but generally, yes, we could use that. So that's really
Okay.
sort of the isolated issue we were talking about. Going back one step, though, just to address it's the same as the gift policy, including that expansion from the SEC insider trading rules is really a decision that we didn't really make, the committee didn't really make the decision because there were these other questions raised. So really, the first question is similar to the gift policy, is do you want to add this other non-securities related, non-public information restriction in your securities trading, insider trading policy? And I don't think you ever addressed that square on. I think what the committee addressed and members of the board addressed was that the language that's in there may not be comprehensive enough, and that's what we came back to you with. So going way back, getting into our way back machine, the original proposal had two concepts, I believe. And maybe it had more, but the two key ones I remember is, one, are we going to expand that? And I think that was the recommendation of your board governance consultant. Are we going to expand that non-confidential information, non-public information, confidential information restriction to outside the publicly traded securities issue? And then the second one was based upon some SEC action that we wanted to, separate from that, we wanted to include a training portion in the insider trading policy. So there really were two issues when we came to you, and it's just that this one is attenuated now because we were trying to differentiate between the private and public gain.
So what you're saying is, from a legal standpoint, we can put a limitation on private gain for individuals, but we don't have an obligation under the law to also place that restriction on the system for the benefit of the system.
Yes.
Thank you.
And that's reflected in your comment on page 34?
Yes.
Yes.
So you're comfortable that so you, with respect to what you were asked to review last time, we've gotten our answer on that one. And you're recommending that we not apply this to the system itself, although it should be applied to the board and members of the staff with respect to private gain
Yes.
in private transactions, which this policy does.
Yes.
And I guess with respect to that, there are a couple of issues that I'd like you to just talk about to make sure that we have it on the record. Number one is, what's the penalty under this policy? What are the penalties for violating this policy, short of, assuming that someone were to violate this policy but not violate the federal statute?
There is no specific penalty provision written into this portion of the policy. We do have.
Well, I guess I'm looking at page 36. Last paragraph, just before.
We have the disciplinary policy that applies to all of our policies. So we don't have a reporting requirement with any outside agency as far as enforcement, but we always have a disciplinary for failing to follow any policy, and that's what we use. And this not using, the prohibition of using confidential information for private gain is consistent actually with the non-disclosure policy that everyone in the organization signs every year. So it is a consistent message, and this is just putting it in a place where we thought it was appropriate to also mention it.
And so unlike the penalties associated with the federal insider trading policy, there's no restitution portion of this policy at all?
No. It's we didn't take upon ourselves to come up with anything additional other than the normal HR sort of personnel.
And I'm not sure we have the authority to do that.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm not sure either, but,
not sure I would want the authority. The other question that I had, the policy as written appears to apply only to situations where there's actual knowledge. And I guess, could you just, I guess, you know, typically you can see actual knowledge, you can see knew or should have known, you could see, you know, there's 1,000 different variations on the knowledge theme, but this is only triggered if somebody knows that they are knowingly taking an action in violation of the policy. Or they don't necessarily need to know what the policy was to knowingly violate the policy, but they knowingly take the action.
yes, the way it's written is to misuse confidential information. So the first requirement is that you know the information that you have is confidential, and the second is that you then use the information. So it does require what we would call a scienter requirement. You know, there's always a possibility that someone is going to get some confidential information, not know it's confidential, and let it slip. I think we've all done that. Maybe picked up a little bit of gossip that we weren't supposed to tell and let it loose. It's not, you know, I don't mean to trivialize this, but if you don't know it's confidential, there's, you know, the restriction wouldn't apply. So there has to be that conscious requirement. So it is a knowing violation.
Those are the only two questions I had about this policy. Any other questions or comments from members of the committee or other members of the board?
I'd be ready to move approval.
Second.
Moved and seconded, we approve this policy as written. All in favor? Aye. Action has been taken, policies.
Thank you.
So we are now recommending this to the full board for approval.
Yes, sir. And it'll go on the next agenda if there's whenever there's time on the next agenda.
Excellent. So on to the next item, item number 5.
So item number 5 is discussion and input from the committee on the work plan for next year, with in mind the addition, please, under November for the gift policy return, addition of that particular item. But what staff is suggesting, based upon the comments and working with this committee over the last year or so, is that the policy manual itself needs a review. We have, you know, it was a great Herculean effort in 2005, 2006 to put this together. It's still used as an example for other systems. But there is a new, for those of you not familiar, there's the Clapham report that's come out of the Stanford Institutional Investors Forum that was pretty much coincided very much with our original policy with the 2006 changes. Well, that's been revised, and so Jill and I would like to take a look at that, come back with some recommendations for you. So that's what I'm proposing for the first meeting. I know it says first reading, but, and the other things that came up, have consistently come up with board members is the complexity of the policy, the length of the policy, the difficulty in some parts apply to board members, some parts apply to staff. Should we have staff policies in the board policy manual, or should they be separate? There are sections in there that actually recite code sections, which personally bothers me that we have code sections in the policy manual. I would like to work with your board governance consultant and see if we could take a look at some of the, you know, board administration policies, the ethical policies. I'd like to work with your fiduciary council on putting together a fiduciary duty section that doesn't simply cite the statutes but gives us some general principles. So it really is sort of a time, I think, to clean out the stables, if you will, and see if we can reduce this in its complexity and still occupy that place on the top of the hill, but make it easier for folks to reference and make it, I really think that we should consider, and that would be my recommendation after taking a look at it, I think, consider separating out the staff and the board policies that, or making it very clear in one section which applies to which, because right now they're interspersed throughout, and it's difficult, and it's difficult for staff too. So anyway, those are some of the thoughts that we have. We would have to, certainly we would work closely with you, Mr. Lawson, in trying to identify what would be on the agenda for November, but those are, we want to work closely with Ms. Williams and Mr. Lanoff and take a look at this. And even though there was a lot of effort done in 2006, that was 7 years ago, and the world has changed, so.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions from Terry?
Mr. Chair, I think the recommendation of Mr. Bartow is appropriate, especially given the fact that we will be revisiting in a few months again the gift policy. I know reviewing all those policies separate from the investment policies is probably due again. I would agree with you, Brian, and so I would like to ask the chair to recommend that come back to the board. Are we supposed to adopt this today? Actually,
No.
it's
No,
information.
it's just
item.
information.
So at the July meeting, you'll have a second discussion.
July meeting, we can hopefully approve it then.
Certainly. Any other comments?
Basically, just I concur. I mean, that's a pretty robust work plan. So, I mean, if we could get through that in a year, that would be, or well on our way, that would be pretty ambitious, I think. So I'd be in support of that.
I agree. We have the consensus of the committee.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Informational requests? Hearing
Just
none?
We're coming back with a gift policy with addressing and trying to incorporate the comments of the committee, and then the work plan. We'll make minor revision. We'll add the gift policy, and also I'm going to take the first reading out of November. It's really a presentation to the committee on.
Excellent. Anything else? Sounds good. That brings us to our draft agenda for the next meeting. Any modifications, or I guess modification based on the informational requests that you just described?
Yes, I know we'll be bringing back the gift policy as an action item.
Absolutely. Any public comment? Seeing none, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So your ledge committee is scheduled for 11. Did you want to break, Grant, for a minute, or?
Probably. What's the pleasure of the members here? Maybe 11:20.
Okay.
Sounds good. We're
So
adjourned.
Grant is chairing the ledge committee.
Brian, guess what?